Like Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, an ISIS terrorist who returned to Canada in the past few years recently gave an interview with the New York Times podcast, The Caliphate. In the podcast, Abu Huzaifa states that he worked for ISIS enforcing Sharia law in Syria. He brags about getting splattered with blood while brutally lashing people who broke their laws. And he proudly admits to murdering ISIS prisoners and having, and he said, the bloody irony smell on his hands. When is the Prime Minister going to stop allowing these bloodthirsty terrorists to walk on our streets, but throw them in jail instead?
Mr. Speaker, once again we see the Conservatives trying to drum up fear is a way of political attack. We have every reason to be responsible and serious about how we protect the integrity of Canadians and the safety of our communities. But quite frankly, illustrations like that question, or, for example, the attack ads they put out that featured footage of ISIS executions for political gain are below the norm and shouldn't be acceptable in Canada, and the Conservatives have a lot to answer for if they're going to keep up that same approach in the upcoming election.
Honourable Member Selkirk, Interlake Eastman. Order.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is actually running away from his responsibilities here. It's a cop-out. I'd like to remind everyone that the Prime Minister hasn't hesitated in giving special treatment to terrorists, like offering classes for returning terrorists in poetry and podcasts. And, of course, he loves writing checks for $10 million. Canadian ISIS terrorist Abu Huzaifa is walking freely on our streets, though he publicly confessed to joining a terrorist group, sadistically enforced Sharia law, and slaughtered dissidents, and he calls it like they were animals. When will the Prime Minister finally imprison ISIS terrorists instead of allowing them to use Canada?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we saw this approach in the last election by the previous government. It doesn't work to try and scare and divide Canadians. Our security agencies take all potential threats very seriously and use the full toolkit of measures, including surveillance, the no-fly list, revoking passports, and laying criminal charges when sufficient evidence exists. The expertise of Canadian security and law enforcement professionals is highly respected around the world. Our security services are doing their work in spite of over $1 billion in cuts they suffered under the Harper government.
Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.